think it must have been in the late 50s or maybe even 59, 60. Uh, Paul was around Chicago. I think he may have been going to Northwestern at the time. I'm not 100% sure. But we bumped into each other in musical situations and sessions. He heard me play. He always liked my music, and I always enjoyed Paul. And so we really reconnected when I was on a fellowship in 1963. I was on a fellowship at Columbia, and what I was doing there was in psychiatry. It had nothing to do with Columbia Records at that point. And I was a 10-week fellowship, and I got together with Paul. And at that point in my life, I wasn't particularly looking for a recording contract anywhere. I was loving to play music and happy to be at Johns Hopkins and going to medical school. And I was sitting in with Gary Bartz and his group in Baltimore, and that was fun. But I had no big aspirations of recording. But Paul had been recording for Columbia for a year or two at that point. And he eventually took me sort of kicking and screaming to meet his producer, John Hammond. And John Hammond took a liking to my playing, and that started me off at Columbia. But it really was solely Paul Winter's doing that got me into the back door of Columbia Records. It was just an amazing act of generosity of spirit and wanting to share something that he was enjoying with me. He believed in my music, and it just started a very ongoing friendship that's lasted to this day. I think he's just a wonderful person. He's a gifted visionary. He's very, very unusual guy who's been able and willing to go against the tide since really the beginning of his career. He started out, as you know, the first album was pretty much like a post-bop album, and very solid musicians, very well played. Then he got really interested in cultural exchange, got interested in bossa nova, and that was part of the cultural exchange thing that he did. And then he got very interested in ecology and the environment and preserving the planet. And increasingly, I think his aesthetic evolved towards more and more elegant simplicity and lyricism, as opposed to some of the harder-edged aspects of bop that he'd been exposed to earlier on. And he once described it to me. He says, I'm really more yin than yang, and that's where I wanted to go. And so he's really been a trailblazer, I think. I mean, sometimes I know he hates this, but he's been called the godfather of New Age music because, without calling it that, just what he was doing sort of set up some possibilities for a lot of other musical groups to follow, to march into, most of whom couldn't have an iota of the aesthetic elegance and training that Paul brings to the music, and with the series of consorts that he's had over the years. So I think he's a very, very unusual guy who's remained true to his vision and belief throughout all these decades, man, and is still doing it, still evolving, still making new music. He's a very special guy.
Hello, Paul Winter.
Hello, Brett.
You and Denny have known each other for a few years.
We have. And what a welcome to your program to hear Denny's comment. It's a total surprise to me that you had that interview with him, and it means so much to me. Because he is really at the very top of my pantheon of great musicians beyond jazz.
Yeah, Denny's a special guy. It's a treat for me to meet you here online. And I grew up not far from where you live, West Hartford, Connecticut, and got into jazz in the early 60s. And of course, I remember very well your early records on Columbia. And then also I discovered Denny at the same time. When Jeremy Steig recorded Flute Fever, Denny was on piano, and that was just, that totally, sometimes you hear a solo, you're listening to a track, you hear a solo, and it just jumps out of the speaker. And the first time I heard Denny, it was like that. Who is this? Just incredible. Well, let's go back there to the '60s because you like kind of came to public recognition as part of the jazz festival at Notre Dame, and John Hammond, the great producer who worked with Bob Dylan and so many Benny Goodman, so many great artists over the years, signed you to Columbia Records. What was
It
that
was actually
like?
it was the Georgetown Intercollegiate Jazz Festival that we won, which was about two. That festival the previous year had been the inspiration for me to create the consort. I'm sorry, the sextet that I did then in the following year, and it was the Age of Jazz Festival, May 7th, 1962, where John Hammond and Dizzy Gillespie were the judges, where we had this unbelievable break to win this prize, which was a recording contract with Columbia.
How did the South American tour happen?
That summer, in Chicago, Dick Witzel, the trumpet player who was sort of my partner in creating the sextet, I said, we're sitting around and we had no work, no prospects, very few jazz groups at that time, even well-known ones, had much work. And I had the thought that it would be great if we could ask the State Department if they would consider sending a student jazz group on the tour, as they had been doing with famous groups for about 5 years by that time. In the late 50s, they began a cultural exchange program, and they sent Louis Armstrong to Africa and Benny Goodman to Russia, Dizzy to the Middle East. And we were, at that time, unofficially maybe the top college jazz group in the country. And we were 3 blacks and 3 whites. We were a perfectly integrated band at a time when civil rights was a burning issue in our country. And we maybe the State Department might be interested. It was a total pipe dream. We sent a letter to them, hoping they would consider sending us to, especially the Iron Curtain countries, where I'd had many years of correspondence with jazz fans behind the Iron Curtain. And they sent a form letter and said, send in on audition tape and we'll have our jazz panel review it. We scraped together $60 and went into a recording studio for the first time ever and recorded 6 pieces and sent it to the State Department that July, and thinking that that's the end of that. In October, we got a letter from them saying, we're going to send you to Latin America for 6 months. It was unbelievable. A tour through 23 countries, beginning in early '62. And that happened. It was a total stroke of luck.
Well, I guess it was made to happen. Sometimes life has these surprises in store for us. And certainly, in addition to you bringing jazz to an audience in South America, you got a lot from that trip as well, because you came back and brought certainly Brazilian music, bossa nova, which at that point was new to the United States. I mean, I think it was you and Stan Getz Desafinado that, like, people said, what is that? And then The Girl from Ipanema, and then boom. What was it about Brazilian music that spoke to you?
The night before we left for Haiti to begin our State Department tour, at the end of January '62, our manager, our new manager, Gene Lees, who had been the editor of Downbeat magazine and agreed to come with us on the tour as our manager, played for us João Gilberto's first record, the Chega de Saudade. And we were all just beguiled by this very unusual music, very gentle, but very soulful, full of all the kind of great chord changes that we loved. And the voice that was very, very quiet, but as soulful as any of the kind of the louder voices that we had become accustomed to in that sort of post-bebop era. And so we very much looked forward to our visit to Brazil, which was 5 months off. It wasn't until June that we had come all through Central America and down the west coast of South America, came up from Uruguay into Brazil. And we spent a month there, and we're absolutely, Bossa Nova was just blossoming in their country, and we were beguiled by the music, the songs, and the musicians, and actually began recording with some of them in Rio during our week there. And when we got back to the States, Columbia said, "We want you to do this album first." And so that's how we did the album called Jazz Meets the Bossa Nova.
Yeah, that was some very fresh music, and it became very popular very fast. I mean, you know, it was wonderful sound that to this day still sounds fresh and wonderful. Who were some of the musicians that you collaborated there when you started to record when you were there? Is that when you met Oscar Castanieves?
Exactly. We met Oscar and Gene Lees. We met Joe Beam, of course, and Gene Lees stayed on in Rio after we left to work on English translations of, or rather English lyrics for Joe Beam's songs, and began a collaboration that lasted quite a long time. And then he rejoined us about 3 weeks later when we got to British Guiana.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I wanted to ask you, like, your direction, your journey, you know, the usual jazz musician journey, learn how to play the music, get some attention, get a label contract, go on tour, and music really unless we're talking about an innovator like John Coltrane, music really pretty much stays the same. You did not follow that route of bebop, whatever you want to call it. You took an entirely different direction. Do you think it was the trip to South America that planted the seeds for your later changes?
That exploded our world. We realized then the world is full of many traditions and many different kinds of music, and the jazz had a role. Our music seemed to be almost more essential in those countries than in our own, and that's what fascinated me. The fact that music could be such a kind of a passport for people to connect who came from totally different traditions, and it really the whole cultural exchange thing gave a sense of purpose to what we were doing that was beyond art and entertainment, and so that really was the impetus to kind of embrace the whole world.
Yeah. We'll throw in a quick question here from Charlie Friedberg. If you went to Rio today, would you be able to experience the bossa still?
In certain niches, yes, absolutely. And there's many, many great players. But unfortunately, the global influence of mass media from our country has dumbed down the taste of people's in most parts of the world, and Brazil is no exception. I mean, the mass music there is a very low common denominator.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention here, a viewer just brought it up, Mike Farmer, one of our viewers from the UK, he says he still has the Downbeat magazine with the White House photo of the Winter Sextet. How did the White House thing happen, Paul?
We came back in July of '62, and the group essentially broke up. We had no work. Dick Witzel and then Warren Bernhardt, our pianist, and Jim Lees and I decided we would go to New York and did a funky penthouse apartment up on West End Avenue, and we thought we would try the music business. Les Rout, our baritone player, went to study at University of Michigan. Harold Jones, the drummer, went back to Chicago to play there, where he was very much in demand. And Richard Evans, our bassist, joined Ahmed Jamal's trio. And it seemed it was very it was a great letdown because we had had such triumphs in these 161 concerts in Latin America, and great accolades from all the State Department people who hosted us about they would say, you guys did more in one night than we can in a year to bring about better relations with and a better image for the United States, because everything that we do, they would say, is or everything they do is regarded as propaganda. So we were in New York and just wondering what we might be able to do, and we had yet to record our first album with John Hammond, and that was scheduled. But other than that, we had no work. But one place that had heard about the tour was the White House, and it may have been from a letter I wrote to President Kennedy in March from Peru, just affirming this idea of sending a student group on the State Department tour was a great idea, that we'd had such great interactions with students and seminars and different contacts, as well as just performing the concerts. And so out of the blue came this letter from Jackie Kennedy inviting us to play at the White House in a series of concerts that she had started called Concerts for Young People by Young People. And they had all been classical up to this time, but they felt that we had an aura of respectability about us, which much jazz did not in those days. And they would take a flyer, they would take this, do this experiment of having a jazz group play there. And a couple of weeks before the concert, some journalists did some research and found out that there had never been a jazz concert at the White House. And so that this was a kind of historic moment. So at the in the evening room that day, that afternoon, it was filled with children from all the different embassies in Washington, but the back of the room was loaded, crowded with journalists from all over. And the next day, there was front page publicity across the country with pictures of Jackie smiling and captions like "Jackie digs jazz." So we were famous for a couple of minutes after that.
Yeah. Did you see John F. Kennedy? Were you in his presence?
No. China had invaded India that morning, so he was busy.
He was busy.
He was down the hall. Somebody said he probably heard us, but I actually never met him.
Okay. Well, these obstacles that you faced initially of trying to you achieved some recognition, but then whereas work brings up a question, and that's for an artist who goes outside the mainstream, so to speak, to pursue a career of choices that are personal, that the music is motivated by something within. Yet you encounter, because you take this stance, you encounter a lot of obstacles. What have you used along your life? You've achieved a lot, but I'm sure you've had moments, you've had challenges. Where do you draw your inner strength from?
It's a great question. I wish I had enough objectivity about my own journey to kind of see the patterns, but the whole question of what constitutes a calling in life as opposed to a career. I've never really had a career. I mean, a career has certain structure and a certain motivation that's different. The calling it's like not something that you choose, something that chose you. And I loved music so much. I loved the fact that music seemed to make people feel good, maybe behave a little differently, maybe tour a little more collegially to each other. And that goes back to the origin of that goes back to when I was 5 years old, and my parents took me to a Shriners dance in my hometown of Altoona, PA. And they parked me behind the drummer in this little 5-piece combo. It was Henry Hammond's quintet. Henry was the drummer, and I sat there transfixed behind this guy playing a drum set and watched his left foot doing one thing on a hi-hat and the right foot on a kick drum and his hands. I thought that was amazing, but I remembered mostly that when that music was played, and this is 1945, it would have been the standards of that era. People were dancing, and people really seemed to be enjoying themselves, being together very much. People were more outgoing and friendly than usually people are in their day-to-day life in a northern city like Altoona, where people are reserved the way many of us are from this Northern European heritage. But music unlocked something in people that just struck me. And I, of course, never thought about that again, but subconsciously that sort of set the stage for the path that I've been on ever since.
Well, it's been a fascinating path. I'm wondering, when did the transition between the sextet and the consort happen, and why?
The sextet ended in December of 1963. We had a good run with Columbia. We had made 5 albums, and we were making what became our last one. It was titled "And Jazz Meets the Folk Song," and we were in the studio recording when JFK was shot, and that completely shattered our bubble. I remember we had to do one more week of recordings after that. It was the darkest time that I didn't know. And the final recording that we did was an arrangement by Cecil McBee of "We Shall Overcome." Witzel had, a few months before that, decided he was going to leave music and go to medical school. As my partner, he was really he was the really effervescent bebop jazz spirit in the group. And I was totally disillusioned after that. And beginning in '64, I went to, by the summer, I realized I wanted to leave New York, and so I went to Rio, where I lived for most of the next year. And that just changed my musical path in many ways.
Yeah, Rio's a magical place. Were you jamming down there with some of the Brazilian musicians?
Well, I went down. Opportunity was that Columbia gave me a budget to do an album down there, and I had met Carlos Lira in '62 when the first group of bossa nova musicians came to New York to do a famous concert a concert that became famous later at Carnegie Hall. And Carlos, wonderful singer-songwriter, he's still with us in his later 80s, who was really the second great pioneer of the bossa nova songs after Jobim, but whose songs he never had the good luck to have the hits that Tom Jobim had. But I met him that November of '62, and their concert was 2 days before our concert at the White House. So it was an interesting time for all of us, and Carlos and I talked about the idea of doing an album. So that was the first thing that I did in that period in the summer of '64. And another album, the album with Carlos was called "The Sound of Ipanema," and then I did another one that was simply called Rio, with Luis Bonfa and a group of other Brazilian musicians.
Yeah. So with the consort, how did you choose the configuration with oboe, sitar, guitar. How did that particular configuration come to be?
Well, sitar was a little bit later. In the first consort um, was sort of peopled in terms of the instruments from the influence of music I heard in South America. Now, actually the double reed I had heard during our State Department tour, a recording in the home of one of the cultural attachés from the embassy in Lima, Peru, of a recording by an American composer named Wayne Barlow called "The Winter's Past," featuring oboe, and I was beguiled by that sound. I thought that's a beautiful horn, and I thought no more about it. But in Brazil, with the orchestrations of some of the recordings for Jobim, and then learning more of the classical music of their great composer Villa-Lobos, who loved cello, I was thinking of having these kind of instruments in a quieter ensemble, inspired by bossa nova music with a Brazilian guitar and hand percussion instead of the drum set. Because if you have quiet instruments like that, a powerful drum set player it kind of overbalances it. So I came home from Brazil with this vision for this group that I eventually called Consort, with instruments, very much though thinking of the texture of Bill Evans' arrangements, especially those 3 grid albums of Miles Davis. That was the sound that I imagined, and I looked for a long time to find players of cello and oboe, English horn, who would be willing to play with a group like ours. But I was lucky to find some wonderful players, and so that's where that began.
Well, those players, I'm talking about wonderful guitarist Ralph Towner and oboist Paul McCandless and Colin Walcott, sitarist and percussionist. They became Oregon, and that became, that music, that sound became like, I don't want to say, I hate to pigeonhole these things, but in a way, a new category, a new era, a new area for musicians in jazz to apply their own stuff to. I mean, you guys were really the first to do that, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, that instrumentation really came out of that consort that emerged from my Brazilian period, and Paul McCandless was the first of those great players I met. He was actually the second double reed player that we had, but I met him in '69, and then in 1970 through the cellist Richard Bach that I had found. He had heard Ralph Towner in New York, and he suggested I get in touch with Ralph, and because I wanted a guitarist who had deep grounding in both classical and jazz traditions. And Ralph then brought Glenn Moore into the group. They had grown up together in Oregon and played there for many years, and they were great friends with Colin Walcott. And I wanted a percussionist like that who played a whole array of hand percussion, and who this broad spectrum of traditions that I wanted to draw from. And so it was starting in January of 1970. That was the consort that toured quite a lot for the next 2.5 years. And Ralph and Glenn and Colin and Paul McCandless often played, did sessions on their own, improvising in ways that were sort of beyond the repertoire of the consort. And they were all masterful players and really felt that they wanted to go deeper in that direction, whereas my inclination and that of David Darling, who was our cellist by that time, was more toward ensemble, a balance of ensemble improvising. But I wanted the texture of a 3-horn, 3-voice lineup So the Oregon guys kind of emerged in a very natural sort of progression from the consort, and then took it their direction in a brilliant way for over 40 years, and have all that time sort of been kind of our brother band.
Yeah. A question here from a viewer. Charlie Feinberg again wants to ask you, how did the Brazilians like the Americans playing their music?
It'd be hard to give a general answer to that. I'm sure that they had a gamut of reactions to what happened very quickly with bossa nova here. It became commercialized and run into the ground within 2 years. And I don't think they were all that happy about all the different attempts to capitalize on the success that really came from Stan Getz and Charlie Bird's album that came out in June of '62. They actually, the very month we were in Brazil, and it became a huge hit. And they were the ones that really put bossa nova on the map. And it was very beautifully played, as were all the albums that Getz did with different players. But there were a lot of other albums that would maybe not come up to that standard, so to speak. So I think they had mixed feelings about it, and I think they felt gratified that there was this interest in their music, but it went south very quickly there after the dictatorship took over in '64, and it became kind of a joke in this country by the mid '60s. I mean, it was bossa nova ice cream or bossa nova this or that under the sun, everything, and not everybody knew what bossa nova really was, so it was sort of a bit like the hula hoop for a while, and that of course is all old history now, and I think people can now listen to the essence, the beauty of the great authentic bossa nova music and appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, certainly among jazz musicians in particular, the interest in the music has never waned. And there's been a lot of fantastic collaborations. We'll talk in a little while about one of your Solstice concerts that I watched recently where you collaborated with Ivan Lins, who's an incredible Brazilian, he lives in Portugal now, but Brazilian singer, songwriter, performer. So I must ask you, how did you get involved with collaborating with Wales?
In the spring of 1968, a friend in New York told me that he had heard a recording of whale songs. And I remember he said to me, man, he says, you listen to it on your phone and it's better than an LSD trip. Well, in spite of that, I thought, I want to find out what he's talking about. I couldn't imagine what he means, whale songs. And I learned that there was going to be a lecture at Rockefeller University in New York by Dr. Roger Payne, the man who had recorded the whales. And I went just out of curiosity because I was then and still am interested in all sorts of sounds. And it changed my life. The beauty of their voices, which you could say it had a poignance of bluesiness of the great jazz instruments, great voices from different cultures that have that yearning quality. Technically, it was extraordinary because their swooping songs went off the top end of our hearing and off the bottom end. And then to learn that they would sing these long, complicated patterns with as much variation as, say, a Beethoven symphony, lasting 30 minutes, and then they repeat the entire long pattern verbatim. All the whales, and it's actually all the male whales, because it's the males who sing, in that area of the sea would be singing that same song during that season. and the next year you come back and put your hydrophone in the water and they're singing a new song, equally complex, and they're all singing it. And so that was an astounding revelation about an intelligence in a creature heretofore people regarded as just a big fish. And along with that came the information in Dr. Payne's lecture that the whales were being exterminated for products, all of which could be found more cheaply on land, lipstick, dog food, whatever. But it was the last vestiges of a dying industry that was going to take the whales out. And that made me into an activist that night.
I can definitely understand that. I mean, on this planet, it would appear that not only do people have difficulty getting along, but people can't even get along with animals. I mean, and one of the most upsetting things is what we've done to the oceans on this planet. You know, a lot of Americans don't realize there is a concentration of plastic in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that's about the size of Texas. And what happens is that this plastic affects the wildlife, the sea life in the ocean, and it eventually affects us as well. And you know, we're facing a lot of problems, but this is one that there needs to be certainly more of a dialogue about. And Paul, you've been involved with Greenpeace, the environmentalist movement, working as let's say, a musical activist, so to speak. Which of your other recordings address these type of issues?
We have incorporated voices of different creatures in a number of albums. The first was an album entitled Common Ground in 1978, where we included songs of the whale, the wolf, and the eagle, kind of representing the three realms of the sea and the land and the air. Many of the albums over the years have included creatures. The newest one is a creature that I heard right outside the window of this room I'm sitting in here in my cottage in Northwest Connecticut, the wood thrush. And some years ago, in June, I heard this very beautiful wood thrush song in a tree in the woods outside here, and would listen each morning and evening to hear it, and I began to realize once I went to the piano to play the phrases in this 4-phrase song that the wood thrush repeated again and again, and realized that he was singing in C major. So he became my C major wood thrush. And we heard him all through that summer, and they leave in late summer and go to Costa Rica or somewhere south. But for 5 years in a row, wood thrush came back here to the same tree, singing the same song in C major. So I, of course, tried to record him and thought I want to do a piece of some kind with this voice, because the wood thrushes, the songbirds are in great danger. In the last decades, we've depleted 70% of our songbirds. And the wood thrush is one of the most notable here in Connecticut. And I know when I first came here 40-some years ago, I would walk through the woods, and every couple of acres I'd hear a different one, because each one has its own territory and its own unique song. And in recent years, I've walked much further to find the next one, as they're not making it back from their wintering grounds in Central America. So I began to play with the musical phrases in this song. Each phrase has 3 notes, and I realized that in each of these 4 phrases, the respective 3 notes outline a different chord. And when I played those chords, they happen to be the same first 4 chords of the prelude to Bach's Welcome Clavier, which is, of course, in C major. So I thought, well, this is some amazing aesthetic miracle that the universe has brought to me. So we need to do a piece that honors both old JS and his harmonies, and also the spirit of the wood thrush, for which I felt I wanted to do a kind of Brazilian celebration. So the piece is called the Well-Tempered Wood Thrush.
Eric Dolphy used to practice outside, and he tried to imitate the sound of the birds. That really spoke to him. In your collaborations, your journey working with other species, have any of their sounds influenced you on any of your instruments?
Well, sure. All the ones I've mentioned, and there's a whole series of bird voices that are going to be part of a new project I've been working on for a long time called Flyways, a celebration of the great bird migration from southern Africa through the Middle East to Europe and Asia, where 500 million birds of 300 some species migrate north at one point of the year, and 6 months later come back south. And we're using, in this project, we're using incorporating indigenous voices from all 16 cultures over which they fly. I've been working on this for over 10 years, and there'll be quite a few bird voices that I think are unique, that will be part of this.
How did you start doing the winter solstice concerts? How many years is it now? It's like decades, right?
We just did our 41st.
That's decades.
In the late 60s, I'm sorry, the late 70s, we were playing in New York at an event, and a man came up to me after the concert and said, my name is Jim Morton. I'm the dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Would you be interested in coming to play at our cathedral? And I was taken aback, because I had been there once and been completely blown away by it and couldn't imagine playing there. And the occasion was the funeral of Duke Ellington in May 27th in '74. Being in that space as the largest cathedral in the world, with several thousand people hearing Duke's music echoing through this vast canyon, was epiphanic for me. And I had never imagined hearing this music that I loved so deeply in a context that made it absolutely sacred. Not sacred in any particular theological tradition, but sacred in terms of the reverence that evoked in people. And thought of playing there, I thought, I didn't think we were ready, and I politely declined the invitation from the dean. And a year later, he came up again after another concert and asked, and I again declined. Finally, the third time, the idea was that we would do a program, a special program of the music of Bach. And I thought, okay, well, Bach is certainly worthy to play in this cathedral, even if I feel our music isn't ready. So we did this program Bach, and went very well. And he asked me, he said, how would you in the concert like to be artists in residence here? And I was completely stunned again. And I said, wow, what would that mean? And he said, that means you can do anything you want, baby. This is a very remarkable man whose mission, I don't like that word really, his dedication was to create a bridge between spirituality and ecology in this very, very open-minded, open-hearted cathedral. It's an Episcopalian cathedral, it's not Catholic. And I think he felt that because of the ecological dimension in our music, that we would be, our music would be appropriate there. So that first December, that the first year, as the holiday season approached, I thought, wonder what kind of event we could do there that would not be seen as being liturgical. It wouldn't be Christmas music. It wouldn't be evangelical. It would just be, because the invitation was totally secular, had nothing to do with doing anything religious. And I thought, what would be the most universal milestone of the year we could celebrate? And it occurred to me it would be the winter solstice, which embraces everybody, at least in the northern hemisphere of this planet. And so we did our first winter solstice celebration that December, never imagining that we would still be doing it 40 years later.
Paul, you bring together a fascinating amalgam of artists and cultures. When you got the call to do your own thing, so to speak, I'm sorry about that. When you got the call to do this, did you have in mind this event that would incorporate so many different cultures and people and musicians?
No, that grew with the context. I mean, the cathedral I've always thought of as a kind of oasis, as a garden where things grow if you have a chance to participate in it and express yourself. And it's an extraordinary place acoustically with a 7-second reverberation. And so playing any one of our instruments there alone without a mic is magical, and you can be heard throughout the whole place. And I've been interested in so many different cultures over the years that the idea came up after a couple of years, let's have a special guest from a different place. And so we started every year having somebody from a different tradition around the world, and it's been absolutely amazing. I mean, we did an anthology last year called Everybody Under the Sun that has the special guests from 38 years of the solstice events, with singers from 13 different cultures, 22 different singers, and and then we incorporated a dance, or invited a dance ensemble, the Forces of Nature, who sing and drum. I'm sorry, who dance and play drums in the West African traditions, and it's been a forum where we could try almost anything we wanted, and continue to be great fun.
Well, this 2020 concert, unfortunately, you weren't able to do it live, but you have, I believe there's a link to your website, a show that you've assembled of the best of, so to speak, of performances from different years. I watched it recently. I was totally blown away by it. Unfortunately, I've never been able to make it to the event itself. Of course, I know about it, but I was just struck by the organic nature of how these different cultures and musicians all fit together into one very moving, powerful event. Now you're in the tape. We unfortunately weren't able to show that today. You collaborated. You had a group with Warren Bernhardt and Cecil McBee, Jamie Haddad, Marvin Stamm, and you collaborated with a West African musician. Please fill me in. What was his name, and what is that music?
Abdoulaye Diabate is from Mali, and he's a griot, a singer. Shaman wouldn't be maybe quite right, but a singer prophet, and they do this amazing improvised storytelling and improvising a lot of the words on the spot. And he has a wonderful voice. It's a very unique way of singing. And this was a piece that Warren Bernhardt had written after our State Department tour, based on a folk melody from Haiti. And it was called Sweet Port-au-Prince. And one of the movements of it felt very kindred to him, to Abdoulaye. So we had him sing with the sextet. This was the 50th anniversary of the sextet. where we had this reunion cameo in the middle of our solstice celebration.
Yeah. So I would strongly advise people to jump over to Paul's site, and you can get to the celebration, paulwinter.com. Before we jump off here, we've somehow managed to burn through almost an hour here. Let's talk about your new recording, which is, let me bring it up here, Light of the Sun. Tell us about Light of the Sun.
For most of my musical journey since I was 12, I've been wearing two hats, one as a sax player and one as a band leader. And the band leader hat has really prevailed almost all these years. And I've always been content in my ensembles, the sextet and the different consorts, to play as part of the ensemble. And it was never about featuring me. It wasn't me with backup players. I wanted to have an equal footing in a way, and equal time, equal voices among all the players. And for years, I've harbored the dream of doing an album just featured my own horn. And so when I turned 80, I thought, well, this might be a good time to do it. And so I wove together recordings of many of my favorite pieces I love to play, recorded in my three favorite acoustic places on the planet, which are the Cathedral, an amazing wing of a museum in the mountains of Japan, the Miho Museum. It has extraordinary acoustics, and the Grand Canyon, which has been my place of pilgrimage for many years. And I had some extraordinary accompanists on this album, including my great longtime friend Denny Zeitlin. And I think it's my testament as a sax player.
And how did you do the collaboration with Denny? Were you did you send tapes back and forth, or how did that work?
I played over his recording of two songs. One is called Hymn, and the other is called Quiet Now.
Yeah. So once again, please go to paulwinter.com for information about that. Paul, you're 81 years old. You don't seem to really have slowed down very much. You mentioned you've got projects you've been working on for a while, new projects on the horizon. What have you got coming up that you'd like to talk about?
I hope to finish the Flyways project this year. I'm working on another project inspired by our years of experience with the traditions of winter solstice that's called Sunchild. A whole series of anthologies of music from our archives. I have the good fortune of owning the recordings or the rights to all 52 of the albums I've done since 1961. And so I have quite a lot of projects in the kind of archival realm to work on this year. And we'll probably do some live barn concerts from my barn here, like we did last summer. As long as the concert halls are closed, we'll be doing virtual concerts here, which we were thrilled to find out that we could do it from the barn. And my daughter has become absolute expert at handling video productions, and so we have no shortage of projects on the drawing board.
Yeah, well, in these difficult times, and it's particularly difficult for performers, be they musicians, actors, dancers, because, pardon me, they can't perform live at this time, and we're not sure when that's going to happen. Nevertheless, there is a significant amount of streaming happening from clubs, from people in their homes, whatever. How do you feel about this whole streaming thing? Do you ever watch any of these concerts, Paul?
Oh, sure. it's amazing that it can do it. I don't know if even 10 years ago that we would have known how, or there would have been any pattern, any tradition of this. I guess the history of our species is that we've kept adapting to the realities that we were presented with. And so this is a time of amazing challenge and hardship and amazing, I think, new breakthroughs in different ways. And this is one of the ones that I think is extraordinary, because we can reach people all over the world through the technology now. And I'm not in any way a tech person, and fortunately have a brilliant daughter who is part of the 21st century in every way, and who's been our guide. But I do think it's this is one of the blessings that has come from this very, very difficult time.
Absolutely. I think it's up to musicians, excuse me, to utilize the technology. I've been an advocate for this technology. I first got on the internet in December of 1994. It was just kind of beginning. And I thought, jazz is a global medium, music is a global medium. This is a way for people to come together around the music. And lo and behold, it's really happened. And there's good points and bad points. I have a love-hate relationship with YouTube. I love YouTube for its possibilities and the fact that I can go in there and listen and see, people from the history of music. I hate the fact that most musicians aren't compensated for their music on YouTube. I also have a love-hate relationship with streaming, because once again, same thing. You go to one of these sites like Spotify, you can listen to just about any kind of music from the history of jazz, but musicians make very, very little. On Facebook, you see musicians posting their royalty checks from Facebook's 48 cents, 64 cents. It's a very unjust system, but nevertheless, this is a yin-yang life, so to speak, and somehow we've got to find the middle path and love each other and take care of each other, and hopefully, Paul, with people like Paul Winter around to inspire us, continue to do what we do. So, Paul, I really want to thank you for taking time out to do this. It's an honor for me to talk to you here. I've been listening to you since the early 60s. Blessings to your family. Any final words to our audience?
Well, thank you, first of all, Brett. What a privilege to talk with you, and very gratifying to know of your interest in what we've been doing. And I just want to say, all these issues that we have now. I mean, and if justice will demand that eventually musicians are compensated, I think we'll find a way to do it. And if enough people speak out, which they are, it's out of balance now. And so many of the things that we do, they become crazy at first. It will find a balance. So I'm just thinking of the title of that song that I mentioned earlier, that was the final one on our last sextet album, "We Shall Overcome."
Absolutely. I am, in the past week, become a little more guardedly optimistic about overcoming. Everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with Monty Alexander, wonderful pianist. Please stay safe. Please love each other, and keep listening to jazz. Bye-bye.